morning. Today we're going to work on function notation. So we've already looked at what a function is, so now we're kind of moving on from that. So there is a certain way we write things. It is called function notation. So what is function notation? Function notation is a form of writing equations so that they have an input and output. So instead of y equals, we're going to put something called f of x. You can also have g of x, h of x. It just like the amount of functions you have, the different letters you would use. Most of the time we just use f of x. So we simply take the y and change it to f of x, which is read f of x. So f parentheses x. This tells us that we have a function and we're going to have inputs to get specific outputs for our graph. So if we have y equals x squared minus 3x minus 4, we simply would just change y to f of x, and now we have a function f of x equals x squared minus 3x minus 4. So when you're writing something in function notation, that is the only step. Change y to f of x. Pretty simple. Now we're going to evaluate a function. So our function is f of x equals 2x plus 5. We are going to evaluate this function at f of 3. So we can turn this into a machine where we have x as our inputs and we're getting outputs, which are going to be our y values, because technically what we want is to have a coordinate point so that we can graph it. And so since we changed x to 3, we're just gonna say x equals 3. We're gonna replace the x with 3 through our function machine. So we're gonna do 2 parentheses 3 plus 5, which equals 6 plus 5. So that means out of the machine, we get a single number, which is 11. So that coordinate point would be 3, 11. So now what happens if we have something like this, a quadratic formula, which is f of x equals 2x squared plus 4x minus 9. So notice we have two x's, and we want to evaluate this function at f of negative 8, f of negative 5, and f of negative 2. So essentially we want 3 coordinate points. So we are going to make our table. So we have an input, process, output. The input is literally what are we putting in for our x values. Negative 8, negative 5, and then negative 2. We want our process to be what we're doing throughout, and then our output to be what we end up with. So we're going to replace all the x's with the number in the parentheses, one at a time. So, and that is throughout, you're not putting different numbers and different x's. If you replace one x with a number, you have to replace all those x's with the same number. So this first one, we have 2 parentheses negative 8 parentheses to the power of 2 plus 4 parentheses negative 8 minus 9. Second one, we get 2 parentheses negative 5 to the power of 2 plus 4 parentheses negative 5 minus 9. And last, we have 2 parentheses negative 2 squared plus 4 parentheses negative 2 minus 9. Our first one, our input of negative 8 gave us an output of 87. Input of negative 5 gives us an output of 21. And our input of negative 2 gives us an output of negative 9. So once you replace your x's with those numbers, essentially you can just plug these into a calculator. So 2 parentheses negative 8 squared plus 4 parentheses negative 8 minus 9, and then just enter and it'll give you the output. So that's the wonderful thing. The only other thing you need to know is that this is, like I said, a coordinate point. So we have negative 8 87, negative 5 21, and negative 2 negative 9. So that's it for that one. Our next part is we are going to evaluate a graph. Okay, so we have a graph. We want to evaluate this graph at f of negative 4, f of 0, f of 2, and f of 5. So these, anything in those parentheses is our x value that we're looking at. So remember, x values go across horizontally. So let's find our first one. all we're doing is finding the matching y value to that x value that is on the curve, so the picture, okay? So first one, we put a coordinate, we're going to -4. So our y value is 2. Next one, we're at 0. We're just gonna stay there because that's where x is 0. Next, we're looking for f of 2, which is down here, -2. And then last, we have f of 5, which we go to the side and down, and it's -1. So f of -4 equals 2, f of 0 equals 0, f of 2 equals -2, and f of 5 equals -1. So that is -4, 2, 0, 0, 2, 2, or 2, -2, and then 5, -1. And that is it for that. Evaluating a function and function notation are pretty straightforward, to the point. If you need any help, just let me know and I will help you out. Bye, guys.